I'm going to call us to order at 6:52 p.m. Thank you all for joining us here on Zoom, and thanks to everybody who's joining live. We're going to get started on, if you're following along, either here in this meeting or outside, we're working on the platform starting at page 7, the economy, good jobs, and workers' rights. We're just going to jump right in. So we're going to skip past our first clerical comment and down to a recommended fourth bullet point that was added by Jason Smith, adding in reward hard work and dedication, or sorry, and innovation. Any commentary on that, Jason? You want to add any information along that? That seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I think it speaks for itself.
Perfect. All right. Any objections to that language? All right. Hearing none, that language has been added under the economy, good jobs, and workers' rights. Jumping down four more bullet points to an additional added bullet point. We're onto another suggestion from Jason: protect and expand workers' right to organize and collectively bargain for better compensation, benefits, and working conditions. Thoughts here?
There is a provision, a couple steps, or like a page below that,
Okay.
but it doesn't address collective bargaining, and this seemed to be a broad statement of principles, and that's why, since unions are such a big part of our party, I thought moving it up was appropriate.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts, commentary?
I
All
agree
right.
with Jason,
Thank,
+1 on that.
thank you. Any objections to that bullet point? All right, hearing none. That one is approved. Let's see if I can make that change, actually. Marco, I am having a technology moment. I'm missing where to approve these comments.
Yeah. Go ahead and click on the share button.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm sorry. It looks like I need to approve y'all as editors. Give me 1 second.
I'm going to jump down just when you're ready with that. If you'll just let me know, I'm going to jump down since those are nice and easy approvals in a row so that we can keep moving. Okay. Um, Okay, we have a recommendation here under good jobs, our third bullet point, to remove the line retirement and health benefits. So there's actually two amendments to this. So I'm going to read the suggestion in its entirety, to require that all employment positions guarantee equal pay for equal work, safe working conditions, retirement and health benefits, paid sick leave, paid vacation leave, paid family leave, workplace accommodation for child nursing, and payment of prevailing wages for public projects. Comments there?
Can we add persons with disabilities?
Where in the bullet point would you like to add that, Jessica?
The accommodations were family. I actually don't have a strong opinion where it goes unless somebody else does, but maybe sick, maybe health accommodations for childcare, people with disability, like probably before accommodations for children nursing, for just workplace accommodations for disabilities, and for nursing children.
Okay, that makes sense. Like maybe putting it in either after safe working conditions or before workplace accommodation for child nursing. Krista?
Yeah,
workers' compensation insurance is actually a critical part of workers' safety. I would not leave it out. It is not a employment benefit. It is the way that you get compensated if you are injured without having to sue your employer for gross negligence or for negligence. So I would not take that out.
Okay.
Can I address that?
Emily?
Ian?
Oh, I think I heard Burke. Since
Yeah.
that's Burke's comment, I'll let you reply.
Yep, thank you, Hannah. If you look down, Krista, at the next bullet point, you'll see that I made the workers' compensation insurance requirement its own bullet point. And
I see it now. Thank you.
You're welcome. The reason I put that there was just that, and then as far back as I can remember, I've worked in legislative sessions since 2011. I remember when the Workers' Defense Project first got started, they fought hard at the very beginning of their tenure to educate Democratic legislators on the need for a workers' compensation requirement because Texas is the only state in the country that doesn't require that of employees. So that's why I wanted to suggest making it its own bullet point to highlight that it's while all of these other bullet points are their own issues, I thought it was important that we suggest that become its own just for education purposes.
Good idea.
All right. I see. I'm trying to go in order, so my apologies to y'all if that's not the case. I'm not sure what order in which hands show up on my screen. So if I'm not getting to you in the order in which you raise your hands, my apologies. Stephen Spainhour.
Stephen, you are muted.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I was muted. I'm going to withdraw my comments because the previous caller made mention of the fact Texas is the only state out of the 50 states that allows employers to opt out of workers' comp, and I think that's something we ought to consider mandating, even though 45% of the businesses say no and the state legislature says no. It affords better worker protections if we have workers' comp, if it's mandatory.
No, thank you. Stephen Price.
Yes, Madam Chair, for lack of, I see the screen moving, right? But I wanted to make, because we were above at the next, the above bullet, but isn't there a better way of making reference to some of these required, because I see the bullet require that all employee positions guarantee equal pay. Isn't that summarized in some of the rules and legislation? I mean, equal opportunity EEOC regulations, if we could just kind of cut that short.
I think that's definitely up for discussion. So there's definitely arguments to be made about the pay differentials between, for example, like women of color and, everyone else, frankly. So definitely, while we do have some protections, we're not seeing all of that played out and actualized in real life. So I would definitely open that one up to comments. Marco, I saw your hand.
Yeah, I wanted to make a suggestion just to be a little bit more productive and efficient. I highly suggest if members, I'm not saying to like limit debate or limit discussion in any sort of way, but I think to be more efficient, if you want to, it'd be a lot easier to have the actual language that you want to replace here and now. So I'd highly suggest, since we all have comment access and suggesting access, if there's something that you want to get added,
How are you?
actually going in and adding the language, because that will
Yes, sir.
improve us being able to, either slightly tweak it or whatnot, and it'll make the meeting go more efficiently. Thank you.
Yes, please. Yeah, if you're able to do so, to add in your suggestion so that we can all see it in real time, I can just click approve and it'll get added in rather than you relaying that to me. So I'm going to go ahead. Are there any objections to change to effectively moving this retirement and health benefits down to this lower section? That's this first edit on this first line of the now fourth bullet point by Paul or by Burke.
Hannah, let me make an observation, please,
Please.
before you do that. I think that needs to be looked at closely, because there is no differentiation between a youth worker or a full-time employee. Having handled a lot of workers' compensation claims before, I know that if there are stringent requirements for either part-time or youth workers, that means everybody's cost of goods is going to go up. Are y'all saying that even when you hire maybe a teenage worker, that worker has to be covered by workers' comp?
Yes, sir. That's what I'm proposing. And there's a lot of, in industries across our economy, there are lots of physical risks that workers will take on without even knowing that they're taking them on. And sometimes we or employers may not even know that those risks exist. So that's why I wanted to suggest that we make sure that every person that is working in Texas have that benefit.
And that includes part-time positions also?
Yes, sir. If the committee wants to discuss making a change to that, then I think the committee is definitely empowered to do that. But that's what that was my proposal.
What are other folks' leanings? I will note that the language around workers' comp and retirement and health benefits and all of those things did currently exist without the distinction between different classes of workers, whether they're youth or part-time or full-time. So that is something that has been approved in the past, though that's not to say that it can't change. What are other folks' leanings?
So, Hannah, I'm going to speak
ahead.
several times on this section since I'm with the Texas AFL-CIO and doing the policy work, and very, very familiar with workers' comp. And I really, really appreciate your addition or your separation as a separate bullet, Burke, because I think it is important. And I think it's important to stress that it is critical that this does cover anyone. Because it doesn't really matter regardless of age, whether or not you're injured and the ramifications of that. So +1 on that. And then also going back to the equal pay comment earlier, and I just want to mention this real quick. And Hannah, you alluded to this earlier. This is about equal pay for women of color, people of color. This isn't something that's covered by the EEOC. This is legislation that legislation has been tried to be passed for several legislative sessions. The 9 legislative sessions I've worked, it has been attempted and unfortunately failed. But this is ensuring that there is an even playing field among again, women, people of color, and others who traditionally are not paid for the same amount of work of their white and usually white male counterparts. So I think that's a very important distinction and very important line. So my 2 cents.
Oh, thank you. All right. I see Larry Davis's hand.
Yes, I agree with Burke and Emily. Most of you may know the Texas workers' comp system is horrible. It protects the employer, not the employee. And we're not giving them much, but it's better than nothing. And I think we need to leave this as is and push for that so that everybody has some kind of coverage. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Clayton Tucker.
I'll keep this brief. I believe it needs to support all workers, because if we give a caveat, corporations will find a way to abuse that caveat. We have to make it apply to everyone, or eventually it'll apply to no one.
That's right.
All right. Given all of that, let's do the 4th bullet point in its entirety rather than doing those separate pieces. Actually, Jessica, you had mentioned adding in disability accommodation language, and we have not added that. Would you like to add, do you have specific language in mind that you'd like to add to that?
I would just say accommodations for persons with disabilities and not based on the thing, not worrying whether it's a health or this or that, just persons with disabilities. Because I think we might get too much in the weeds. Just persons with for persons with disabilities.
Okay, so if you see my cursor, I've highlighted it.
Yeah, it's a little.
Is that what you mean?
I don't even see it on the screen. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the screen. I don't see your cursor. Let me see.
So I've highlighted it in blue if you're looking at the screen share.
Oh yeah, now I'm seeing it. Workplace, yeah. Yeah, in disabilities, that works.
That looks
Okay.
good. It looks good, Jessica.
Okay, are there any objections? Oh, Paul, I see your hand.
Yeah, you said we were only going to take up bullet number 4, and we really need to take 4 and 5 together, since otherwise we're merely striking workers' comp out of 4. So they really have to be considered jointly.
I'm happy to do that. Let's make that adjustment. So 4 and 5. So that is the bullets starting with require that and restore dignity, because we have added an additional bullet point up above that we haven't discussed yet. So are there any objections to the approval of bullets 4 and 5 as currently presented? All right, hearing none, those are approved. Jumping back up to the second bullet point, Jen has added support raising the minimum wage for tipped workers above $2.13 an hour. Any comments on that language? Larry?
Sorry, y'all, I'm not used to being muted. I think the reference to $2.13 an hour should be struck and reworded to support raising minimum wage for tipped workers to the federal minimum wage or federal minimum wage level or national minimum wage.
Jen, would you be amenable to a change like that? I do tend to agree with erring away from specific references, because on the off chance that Texas gets it together and raises this number, then the platform would be inaccurate. So is there a phrasing that would work for you?
Sorry, I lost my signal for a second. What was that?
So Larry's comment was suggesting changing the phrasing from above $2.13 an hour. And I tend to agree, just because of the specificity of it, on the off chance that we do get a raise in that number, that the platform would be out of date. Would you be amenable to a change that includes some of Larry's suggestions, like support raising the minimum wage to the federal minimum wage, or another comparable change?
So the reason I put $2.13 an hour is that is actually the federal minimum wage, and it has not gone up since 1991.
So we could change it to perhaps the tipped workers, to changing it to have tipped workers have the same minimum wage as hourly workers, like changing that specification.
Yes.
Now, I would definitely want to hear from maybe union folks to figure this out, just because $7.25 is technically the federal right now, but raising it to that or equal might create some complications for the tipped portion of it. And that's where it gets kind of wonky.
Okay, I see a couple of folks typing. Y'all feel free to put in comments or add suggestions. Paul?
I was going to suggest that we support eliminating the differential of minimum wage for tipped workers.
How do folks feel about that, Jen?
That in effect would put it at the same level as other workers. So eliminate the differential minimum wage for tipped workers.
I like that.
I like that.
I do like that, but there is now one concern I have with adding that language that also leaves out gig workers and delivery folks. So then that adds that extra caveat. So maybe tip workers and gig economy employees of some sort. We can just fine tune that just a little bit.
Just say all workers.
To independent contractors.
All workers, and remove the word tip or tipped. You just put for all workers.
That would be a good way to encapsulate everybody. Let's see.
All right, just if we could do that, but I do want to kind of offer some support on the tip part, because usually when folks talk about minimum wage, they think the $7.25 an hour and forget that tipped workers get paid even less than that, or even folks with disabilities. And maybe Jessica, if you want to add into this one, it is legally acceptable according to federal standards for those who are disabled to get less than minimum wage. So I think we got to kind of add some kind of distinction on those, because
Yeah,
that
are you
tends
talking
to get
about
lost.
yeah, Jen, are you talking about sub-minimum wage employees? Are you talking
Correct.
about something
Yeah,
else?
I'm thinking like tipped and
Yes.
sub minimum wage. These are folks that legally are allowed to get less than the $7.25 an hour. And so when we put all workers, people
Yeah.
just don't immediately think of tipped and anybody who legally gets less than that.
Right. And I don't think sub-minimum wage is I've got a lot of new information about sub-minimum wage from folks that actually do get sub-minimum wage. Sub-minimum wage is a totally different category. Some sub-minimum wage is absolutely atrocious when they use it as an excuse, but there's another form. There's basically folks that it's part of their daycare, their day services when they go to something and they just work on the side, and it's sort of like fun work that they do. But if they get too much money with sub-minimum wage, those folks, they then lose their benefits if they get too much money.
Yeah, that sounds like we might be getting into a little bit more nuance than is appropriate for here.
Yeah, I think
So-
but I appreciate what you're saying. Yeah, I know what you're getting at, Jen, and I think I'm gonna think about how to phrase that once we get down to that. Because there is explosion, but then there's a different category of some of that sub-minimum wage stuff. Because I know like there's some folks at my church who basically go, they see their friends, they do a little work, they get their side money so they can buy the stuff they want, but it's not money that they actually live off of. Versus some of these employers pay some minimum wage and they get no benefits, and they're even further down the
Well,
economic.
let's remember just a few minutes ago, we were including all workers being eligible to get workers' compensation. So if we don't modify that in some way, we're looking at contract workers, we're looking at juvenile workers, we're looking at sub-minimum wage, and you'll be paying out as an employer probably more for the workers' comp than you're actually paying out in salary. So I think that needs to be modified and more specific, maybe about how many hours they work for them to qualify. If you have read handled workers' compensation claims like I did for years, all of those standards are in there, and you have to really, as an employee, meet certain standards to even qualify for workers' compensation. So when we leave it blank
I
like
want to
that,
bring us
don't
back in
qualify.
just a moment. Jean, I want to acknowledge your point, but I want to bring us back to finish this thought before we get too far in. So that, and we're on our second section.
Well,
I'm amenable to the changes. Leave it there.
Okay, so support raising the minimum wage. I was going to suggest for all workers, including tipped workers, and then something to the effect of, Stephen, are you the voices of our veterans on Google? I want to make sure I'm referencing the right
Yes.
person for this change.
Yeah.
Maybe instead of in accordance with to the federal standard minimum wage, and then we just end the sentence there.
That would be good.
I just didn't want to make that edit and take off the 213 an hour.
Okay, so, and that way we're not making a specific wage reference, like a dollar amount.
That looks
Okay.
good.
Awesome. Any objections to this bullet point as it stands? All right, that one is approved.
Question is to the final meaning of that, and that's that as I read it right now, it says to this, what is the standard federal minimum wage? Is that the is that the 7.25? Is that the term for it? Or because 213 is the standard federal minimum wage for tipped workers. So is the wording here accomplishing what we're trying to do?
Yes.
That's a good question.
There's an exception for
is.
tip workers.
Yeah, because including the tip workers as explicit means that we recognize that they make less than $7.25 an hour while being reflective and considerate to the adjustments to inflation that's mentioned in bullet point number 1.
Exactly.
And if y'all are all right with that, I'm comfortable leaving that with the way it is and just getting some confirmation between now and when this goes to permanent to make sure that because it sounds to me like there is consensus on what we intend to say and that we could make a small language adjustment on ensuring that that is the way to say it.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
just in case, I mean, because everybody was wondering, I mean, if it changes, if the standard federal minimum wage changes, then the comment stands. We will be in line with what the federal government says is a standard minimum wage.
Right.
I think it's a good statement.
All right. Let's jump on down to, all right, just to keep us moving along. And just as a reminder, we do have capacity to continue to make changes, but I want to make sure we get through as many sections as we reasonably can. So we're moving on down to page 8. We're at the top of workforce development. The first suggestion is to, let's see, let me make sure I've got this right. This looks like, I'm trying to see if this is added language or here we go. Okay, so this first bullet point, the suggestion is from Emily to move this first bullet point up to workers' rights, which is the section immediately above us that we haven't made changes to, though I skipped some of Burke's changes. We will go back up to those. Emily, do you have context you want to add for us?
It just is not really workforce development as much as workers' rights.
Perfect. Are there any objections to moving that paragraph? All right, hearing none, we're going to move that up here. Okay, jumping back up to the bullet points immediately above that. So we're still on page 8, just above workforce development. We're going to start with the comment eliminate bans on collective bargaining for state employees from Burke. Anything you want to add to that, Burke?
Nope. Thank you, though.
Perfect. Any objections to adding that bullet point? All right, hearing none, that one is approved. Next bullet point, eliminate the ban on striking or strategic work stoppages by public employees.
Nothing to add, but happy to answer questions.
Any objections to that language? Kathy?
I'm concerned about some of the occupations in which there are clauses in their contracts that they, like prison workers can't strike. So when you say all.
So I'm going to defer to Leonard there.
If I can, Madam Chair.
Please.
Yeah, this isn't gonna force or make anybody do anything. Those workers that were being talked about, I mean, if they have this in their collective bargaining agreement or have this in their work rules or policy, I mean, this won't affect them or won't. It is not enforcing them or forcing them to do anything that way. So I mean, I don't see a problem with it.
Kathy, does that answer your question or address your concern?
Yes, but I mean, I guess because of the word ban, yeah, they're not going to get a contract unless you put it in there, so.
The reason I have mentioned the ban is that it is in statute. There's actually a statute in the Texas Labor Code that prevents public employees from strategic work stoppages. So effectively what we would be doing here is encouraging lawmakers to go back and take action on that sort of language and make this more permissive. And to Leonard's point too, unions strike for a reason, and there's plenty of opportunities to fix things and improve working conditions before it comes to a strike or a work stoppage. But we have to let our workers be able to take on their right to represent themselves and negotiate with their employers on how to improve their workplaces.
Laurel.
Working for a union in a state that had the right to strike, this is a very important addition. And if there is legislation drafted, they will put something in there, most likely, that will not allow police, firefighters, correction officials to strike.
Larry.
I was one of the definition of public employees, and I thought most of our prison employees were work for the private sector.
No, they work for the state.
And then I think I saw Jean's hand, maybe.
Yes, I think there needs to be a provision in there, except for people employed in emergency management positions, not only prisons, but fire, police, anything that's of an emergency nature. And I think that's in their oath, isn't it?
Let's see.
As law enforcement.
Hand. I'll defer to our labor partners on that one. I don't know if somebody has any particular context they can add to that.
Well, under the federal system.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Some people are considered essential. Some people are considered essential.
Essential.
And I just don't. They're essential for a reason, because we have to have the service they provide for society to run well.
I don't think we need to make any exceptions. I think that should be done on a business to business basis, or a state to county to county, or city to city, whatever. I don't think that should be something that we accept here. I think we should cover all employees.
Yeah, my leaning on that as well. I can think of a specific example of folks like, our partners in nursing, for example, are absolutely critical to, public health and safety, but have been really, really limited by the restrictions on striking and organizing here in Texas, and their ability to do so has been really impactful for their ability to do their jobs more safely and for the betterment of patients. So I think there's something to be said for kind of both directions.
Madam Chair, I'm a retired railroader and a union officer. And every time we went on strike, the excuse they used for putting us back to work after being out a short time was we were essential to national defense. Mm-hmm. So they'll find a way to put them back to work if they need to.
Yep. Stephen.
I just would say that if we're going to do this, eliminate the word for state employees, because there are collective bargaining agreements at local, municipal, and county levels. So if we're going to ask for a ban at the state level, we might as well ask it at every level.
Burke, thoughts?
I agree.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
We could amend
so
it.
Just bargaining for employees striking state.
Local employees.
I would just say amend it to say eliminate bans of collective bargaining and leave it at that.
I'm sorry, we're on this next one. So we are. I want to comment. We have already approved this bullet point, eliminating bans on collective and bargaining for state employees. We can go back and revisit. The one that we were discussing is the second to last bullet point, eliminating the ban on striking and work stoppages. So the mention is specifically, sorry, of public employees. So what language change would y'all like to see?
About public employees.
Yeah, strike.
Just of employees?
Yeah, just
Or
strike.
ending or
Public
taking out the
employees.
last three words entirely.
Yeah, I would strike the last three words by public employees.
Okay, Emily?
I think, you know, again, you're going back to the kind of the state employees. I know we've already approved that, but I think public employees covers, and I totally agree on the city and county employees. If you do state it as public employees, then that will cover all those bases. So I think you could even keep eliminate the ban on striking or strategic stoppages by public employees, and then just change public employees on the previous line. And I think it would cover what you're trying to get at. Does that make sense?
Does that work for folks, just swapping state for public here in this line?
Yes, good.
That's right on. It's 100% right on.
Good suggestion, Emily.
So, Madam, see if I'm clear. Do we really need both bullets?
They're two different things. So collective bargaining is like really coming to the table and bargaining a contract, whereas a work stoppage or striking is literally a strike. So and not all there are public employees who can collectively bargain, like firefighters, for example, and some others. But that's very limited. And it's very important to have that ability to again sit at the table and do that. Whereas a strike as actually Hannah again alluded to, kind of the nurses.
Gotcha.
So
Right.
it's kind of different. It's a different, animal.
Roger that.
Cool. All right, on to this last bullet point. Stevens added the language "and permanently disabled Texans." Any objection to that addition? All right, hearing none, that's approved. All right, back on down to workforce development. So we are recognize top bullet point, recognize the promise of a secure, dignified retirement for state and public employees and include regular cost of living increases to keep pace with inflation. So Tyler Sheldon added that. Any comments?
I don't know I guess Tyler's on, but I 100% agree with that. And he's with the Texas State Employees Union and definitely follow his lead on this. But I think this is another line that should move up to workers' rights versus workforce development. But I could see either way.
That makes a lot of sense. Any objections to moving that up into the section above? All right, hearing none. We're gonna migrate that one up. Change this. Okay. Bullet point beginning with offer, adding the here. So you have a highlight here, Emily.
Okay. So just
do you care to explain that?
Sure. Just adding Department of Labor in front of registered apprenticeship programs. It's an important distinction. And right now, especially across the nation, but in Texas, there have been a lot of attempts to create kind of a Texas registered apprenticeship program, which is a watered down version of our union apprenticeship programs, and honestly are just not the same caliber. So Department of Labor is a very important distinction.
Any objections to that change?
Can you make it U.S. Department of Labor, please?
That's perfect. Yeah.
Perfect. All right, everybody all right? Great.
I think there's supposed to be a period after UNS.
I think you are correct. Okay, I'm skipping these ands and withs. Thank you, Clayton, for those adjustments. We will jump to those. All right, we are now in the economic and business prosperity section. Our third bullet point down. We have we have a
Hannah?
spelling. Yes.
Before we go
Laurel,
too
yes,
far,
please.
Before we go back, can we go back to the one, let's see, hold on, that we put in, yes. The last bullet that we did before the workforce development.
Recognize the promise.
Yes, because if we're using public employees up by in the other two instead of state employees, why do we could take out state and just a secure, dignified retirement for public employees?
Thoughts on that from others? Any objections to making it just public?
I think that is fine. I know that TSU, again, they kind of, because they're state employee unions, they kind of just have a distinction with state, but I think that should be fine.
I would suggest making it all public employees so that it's, because otherwise you're doing it for some employees and not for others, and you're still complying with it.
Would municipal employees serve better than public employees?
Municipal employees are public employees.
Right.
They're a subset of it.
That would exclude our state partners, if I'm understanding that correctly.
I was thinking state and municipal employees, what I was thinking.
Oh, that makes sense.
So public employees should,
Eliminate public.
Yeah, if you start saying things like municipal employees, there are all sorts of other political subdivisions that are not municipalities that you're leaving out. That's why I suggest all public employees.
Good point.
Okay.
All right. Any objections to all public employees being the language we settle on there? Annette.
No objection to that. So when you're finished with this bullet, it's driving me crazy. It's kind of trivial, but on back to eliminating the ban, if we could make that eliminating bans on striking and strategic work stoppages.
Absolutely. Can you make that as a comment, and we'll go back through when we do follow-ups? Thank you. All right. Back on down to economic, business, and prosperity. We have a clerical fix. And then we are adding a bullet point beginning with, I'll just read the whole thing. Support policies that expand funding and accessibility to affordable, high quality childcare. Annette, that's you again. Do you have anything to add?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was making my comment. Where are we?
Sorry, I gave you too many things at once. So halfway through economic and business prosperity, you added a bullet about affordable, high quality childcare. Do you have any context you want to add to that?
It's none other than it's a crisis across the United States right now for lack of employer sponsored childcare and for quality and affordable childcare in general. I think Texas ranks like 37th or something.
Absolutely. All right. Any comments or feedback on that bullet? Krista.
I don't know where it goes, and I don't know how this goes in. Forgive me for not understanding the process necessarily, but in CD30, we passed a resolution, a new platform position regarding getting rid of the Republicans' insistence that our investment managers for Texas state funds disregard ESG policies affirmatively, which has eliminated a bunch of competitive, low-cost money managers, and it belongs somewhere and probably up here, but I don't know whether the new stuff that's being proposed gets added in here or there's amendments on the floor at convention. I don't know what happens.
So let's finish this bullet point, and then I'm happy to jump to that and clarify so that you can add that language where you find the best fit for it.
Thank you.
Of course. So any objections to the bullet point that we just discussed on affordable, high quality childcare? All right, hearing none, that is approved. So to answer your question, Krista, the way that effectively the platform planks get passed through counties is they come to us as guided suggestions from the county. So especially if they get passed out of multiple counties or, a large number in particular, then that would be something that we're encouraged to look at as we're making changes. It isn't structured the same way resolutions is structured, where there's any minimum number or mandatory number that we have to address or put in as any sort of mandate from the conventions. They're a tool for us to continue making additions both here and then in the permanent platform. So if you have a specific bullet point language that you would like to pull out of that and then add it in somewhere, then that's a great place for this. So when you find a place that you think it makes the most sense, we'll just cover it for discussion. And we reviewed those planks so that are a lot of the submissions so that we could look through and see great ideas and keep an eye out for stuff that folks had worked on within their issue areas. So it sounds like y'all had some folks doing exactly that in your neck of the woods. But if you know where you want it, then just literally you can just copy paste in the appropriate wording and we'll go through it as part of this process. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. I know where I want it. I just don't have the language that got passed, so I'm gonna have to find that.
Okay. And that's
Thanks.
something too that like we can add if you can't find it, or that might be something if you know approximately what it is, since I can't look through it while I'm editing, perhaps one of the officers or Marco can send you the link to the resolution or to those platform planks that passed through. And if you can find it and add it, we can do it here. But if not, it's something you can absolutely send to anybody that's on the permanent committee and we can add it through as part of that process. And I can keep an eye out for it since it's something that you're bringing up now.
Thank you.
Of course. Bailey.
I just wanted to mention to Krista, I had added responsible investing language further down in the pensions section or retirement security. Probably also fits here, but just in case that's helpful for language. Yeah, just wanted to flag that.
No, thank you. Jean.
I was just making an examination of the last one that we just read. It's very vague. Are we saying the state should be paying? Employers should pay? It doesn't seem like it's saying anything to me.
On
Support policies that
childcare?
expand funding. Beg your pardon?
On the childcare bullet point?
Yes. Are we suggesting we have state-run childcare facilities, or what are we saying there?
Annette, do you want to add anything to that specifically? I'm not, I don't want to speak for you on that. Or Emily, I see your hand.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak for Net either, but I know that there's federal money that's partly, but also this is just talking about supporting policies in general. So there has been a lot of state money that goes through the Texas Workforce Commission that is to try to increase the access to childcare, but a lot of that is federal funds. And I know we've even talked to the Texas Workforce Commission about this directly and their commissioners, and they are very interested in expanding this. So, and I think one thing just in general, because I was on the platform committee last time, is like the lens that I'm looking at this whole thing. This is not like us writing legislation. This is a policy statement and where we stand on things. And so I look at this as a lens of, I think what Annette is trying to, it wrote, and it's wonderful that we as Democrats think that there needs to be greater access to affordable childcare, and we should support any policies that get to that point. And that.
Thank you, Emily. I tried to remain high level with that because I know that there's a lot of federal and state partnerships and corporate, whatever the case may be. So thank you. Okay.
No, and I agree with the notion that we don't necessarily have to execute the how in this document as long as we have like the ideology fairly settled. And I think that one does do so here. I do, just because we are now an hour in and very few pages in, I do want to make a small adjustment into how we go through this document. So on the recommendation of Laura, who's been through permanent platform more times than I have, the small tweak to the way that I'd like to go through this is, let's start with everything that we can pass unanimously, and we'll cycle back through for items that need discussion, because it sounds like we're having a lot of items that do need a little bit more discussion. And so I want to get through as much as we possibly can. So if you have discussion, please raise it. But if we're not going to pass something unanimously, then we'll come back to that language as much as is possible, so that we can make as many changes up front as we can, and then we'll flush out those ones that need a little bit more nuance as we go. So I'm going to keep that in mind as we jump down to this next bullet point. From Clayton, promote the benefits and the implementation of the 32-hour work week without loss of pay. Let's say, is there any discussion on this? And if there is, we'll keep moving. Jean.
No, I don't have any
Oh,
My
okay.
hand's
Annette?
up on the last hill.
Oh, I got you.
Let
Annette,
me lower it.
thank
Yeah,
you.
I understand the premise, but I think the wording's going to be confusing. When I first saw it, I think of part-time workers at 32 hours a week. There's nothing to distinguish there with full-time.
Okay, so let's come back to that one. So we have here at the end of economic and business prosperity, we have I'm lost in my own suggestion here.
Hannah, I think Marco was trying to get your attention there a moment ago. He had.
Oh, Marco, go ahead.
Yeah, I think what the chair's intent was is this last one, when it came up, does anyone have an objection? Annette wanted to discuss it more. So at that time, the chair would be like, okay, cool, move to the next one. That way we get
Yes.
through all the unanimous stuff first.
Right.
And then we'll go back and discuss all this stuff. So even if you want to say a tiny little thing, raise your hand, we'll skip it, come back to it.
Yeah. And feel free to just say, as far as I'm concerned, feel free to just say, I have discussion. And that way I'll acknowledge and we can move on. I think that's a good flag. Okay, on this last bullet point, I feel like I'm not seeing this correctly on the screen. Is the comment to add just the word programs?
No,
Or is this, Krista, is this where you're suggesting adding that longer change?
Yes, that's where I was suggesting adding it, and I'm looking for the language still.
Okay, we'll circle back to that one. Jean, I see your hand up. Is that up again or it's just not down yet?
I keep putting it down. It must be going up by itself.
That's okay. That's okay. As
Let
long
me
as I know.
get it down
I'll
again.
check in every time. Okay, we are now down to fair and competitive markets. That is, there's a clerical adjustment, and then here we go, fair and competitive markets. Clayton, I'm not understanding the way this edit is showing up on my end. Is it adding the new bullet point or is it just this change here in the title?
I misspelled competitive.
Oh, okay. Okay. I thought we had misspelled competitive, so that makes sense. Okay. Here we go. All right, we are down to page 10 on democracy. Love this. Okay. First adjustment. Laura.
On the previous one, Clayton, were you wanting to add the entire section? Or just fix the clerical error?
It's a brand new section.
Oh, I misunderstood that with the highlighted color. Okay, is there discussion on the new section? So that's this entire fair and competitive market section.
Correct.
Y'all will glance over that. And if you have discussion, throw your hand up or just say I have discussion.
Yeah, I had a discussion point on the antitrust part.
Okay, let's cycle back to that one then.
Okay.
All right, back down to democracy. First adjustment. So striking the phrase pandemic or other, then the sentence will read, especially in times of crises that threaten these foundations. Any objections? All right, that is approved. Next, so the sentence reads, I'm going to read the sentence as edited. Openness and accountability in affirming and addressing the issues addressed in our party platform and high ethical standards in elected officials and government agencies are paramount to ensure a level playing field and government responsive to the basic needs of its citizens. Any discussion? So there's two edits, both listed in purple. All right, any objections to those changes?
No.
All right, hearing none. Thank you for those, Stephen. All right. Down to voting rights and fair elections, bullet point 4. The suggestion is from Kendall to insert the word automatic or before same day. So it would read, increase access to the ballot through automatic or same day registration. Discussion?
Sounds good.
All right. Any objections? All right. I see Emily has suggested unhoused rather than unhomed. Is there discussion on that phrasing?
Unhoused is actually unsheltered is the term that I've been being here is the right term.
Let's say yes to discussion and we'll circle back to that because I suspect that phrasing is going to come up more than once as we get farther down. All right. As my father would say, we're cooking with gas. Okay. Third to last bullet point, eliminate. This is a new bullet addition from Burke. Eliminate the state ban on labor union participation in local recall elections. Any discussion?
I'd like to
All right.
understand better what that means.
I'm fine with doing that. Burke, can you clarify that?
Yeah. So in state statute, there is a prohibition on labor union participation in recall elections at the local level. And what the statute says really is financial participation. So instead of making it more specific, I just wanted to open it up and be a little bit more broad so that folks have a better understanding of that there is indeed at least some prohibition on local unions getting involved in recall elections, and that means financial investment in races. That I think that also means passing around petition sheets for signatures. So unions need to have the ability to get involved in recall elections if they see fit.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Any objections to that? Or well, first, given the clarification, any discussion? All right, any objections? That is added. All right. Scrolling down to ethics and transparency in government, our third to last bullet point on the page. Adding from Jason, strengthen criminal penalties for elected and public officials who accept bribes. Any discussion? Jessica.
Yeah, I think we may want to add a little bit more specific about this, considering what happened with the Attorney General this cycle. We might want to add something more.
Jessica, I hate to cut you off, but I do want to hear you out as we go back through, just because we're going to do all of this in one fell swoop. But yes, I'm counting that as discussion, so we will revisit.
Yeah, no, I'm just
as much as I'm sure we could all join you in our thoughts on the Attorney General. All right, next, second to last bullet point, protect civil service from partisan abuses, and then adding the word strengthen safeguards, adding 4 whistleblowers in government agencies. Any discussion?
Last Friday, the Texas Supreme Court ruled that if you report an elected official, like on a city council for a crime, you're not protected as a whistleblower, hence the need for the previous sentence and this sentence.
Oh, thank you. With that context, any objections to that second to last bullet point? All right. Fixing that one. All right, on down to education, page 12. Under the line, Texas Democratic Party supports policies and programs that, we're looking at our second bullet point. Oh, that is just a formatting comment, looks like. Never mind. Look at that. Look at our education planks being great. All right, suggestion from Kendall, page 14, prohibit misnamed school choice changing schemes to scams, such as the use of vouchers, including special education vouchers, and so on and so forth. Any discussion on changing schemes to scams? Any objections?
Why don't we put both of them in there?
Ed Martin wanted schemes, but scams is fine.
My leaning is that I think schemes and scams might be repetitive, and just as a personal opinion, the scams is what the party has been using.
No, schemes is what the party did use. Scams is probably better. I was just putting a historical note that it was a former executive director of the party who liked schemes.
Oh, yes. No, I remember that. That's a good flag. I had forgotten it. All right. Any
Schemes and
objections to
shenanigans.
scams? Say that again, Crystal.
Schemes, scams, and shenanigans. Say that 3 times real fast. I'm just being
That would-
facetious.
That would really get us. All right. I'm going to make the change to scams, which lines up with our current messaging. All right. We're going on to page 15 and down to page 16, bullet point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Protecting the rights. This is a new bullet point from Bailey Shum. Protect the rights of undocumented students to receive a free quality education in Texas public schools. Is there discussion?
I have a
All right.
question.
Okay.
Is
Is
that
it just
intended-
like a clarifying question or more of a discussion question?
It right now it's a clarifying question. Is that
Go
K
for
through
it.
12? Is that K through 12? Because nobody gets a free higher education. So that's my question.
Let's see. Bailey?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of intended to be K through 12. I don't mind adding K through 12. I'm not sure
Looking
what
to see if there's
there is
other
on that one.
context around it that would clarify.
I think there is a separate section for higher education, but I also don't mind adding K through 12 just to.
This is in, let me clarify, this is in the K through 12 section already. So we're only talking about programs, and it's actually pre-K through 12. And so right now, this just speaks to what's going on in pre-K through 12.
Perfect. Stephen.
Yes, ma'am. I want to make a point that there is so much in this education piece that I hope, because I know I focus on veterans issues, but I hope there's someone in the group, subject matter expert, that has looked through all of these, knowing that all the heartache we had in the last session over vouchers and schooling and education.
Stephen, I wrote the vast majority of this, and I spent 8 years as the budget chair of education while I was a member of the House, and I was research director of the Senate Education Committee before I got elected to the House. It's also been done in cooperation with people from the various teachers organizations. We've gone over this a bunch of times for a bunch of years. So yeah, there are subject matter people who have gone through this stuff.
We are fortunate to have lots of good eyes on each of these sections. I'm comfortable with Bailey's recommendation as submitted. Are there any objections to that plank as written?
Let me just make one statement in support of it, and having seen this, I may think about if there's any strengthening that needs to be done to it. But the Cy-Fair School District Board just voted. I think they voted, at any rate, they are looking at requiring record keeping on the residency status of their students. In other words, they want to track who are the undocumented students there, and they wanted what they want to do with that. They haven't said yet, but there's a real danger going on about this, so it's very important.
No, truly. All right, last call for objections.
Well, we are going to identify pre-K through 12. Is that correct here?
You don't
Where
need
would
to,
you-
because this is in the pre-K through 12 section.
You might make the section headings a little stronger then, because it's kind of pretty long to figure out where we are.
Yeah.
I would normally say let's continue that, but since we are so deep in this discussion already, I would say let's go ahead and finish this one.
That bullet point by itself isn't clarifying.
So I'm scrolling up to look at all of these headlines. Yeah, these section headings don't specify. So if folks would rather specify, and Bailey has said that they're on board with this, I'm okay with adding it. Bailey, where would you like to see that K through 12 specification added?
I mean, I guess defer to the group, but maybe free quality K through 12 education or pre-K through 12.
That works for me. Any objections to that placement? So that is here. I have highlighted it. All right, it is approved. Okay, we are on page 18 at the bottom. This is under higher education. An added bullet point, freeze public school tuition for a decade to allow working families to better access higher education. Any discussion?
There's more that needs to be done about that. Really what has to happen is we have to restore the more traditional levels of funding for higher education that the state provides. And as part of doing that, that would involve freezing or even rolling back tuition.
Okay, so let's circle back to that one then. Okay, we are now under diversity and safety. Third to last bullet point, adding protect the First Amendment rights and the safety of college students who peacefully protest on their campuses. Any discussion? And if y'all can just hit me with a yes or a hand raise if you have a discussion.
Yes.
Okay, next. Last bullet point, adding repeal legislation that closed DEI offices on campus and led to the unjust termination of Texas Public University employees. I'm going to say yes for discussion on that one, just because I want to make sure that we're talking through how we reference specific legislation.
Madam Chair, Marco had a question or has a question, I thought.
Thank you, Marco. I saw your hand and then you disappeared.
Yeah, I think you had said, Madam Chair, just to clarify earlier when you were saying if someone has an objection to moving on or has discussion, they should say something. And someone said yes, and I just want to make sure that that's what they actually meant. So.
Okay, yeah, Jessica, when you said, is there discussion or objection, did I understand correctly?
I just wanted to add one quick thing to the protection of that. And that was it.
I do want to do the quick thing, but let's really try to blow through these because I think we can get through more of the changes and then go through all the discussion.
Yeah, can I make
So
a
if you can hold
suggestion?
it. Sure.
That the easy thing to do would be to say discuss. And that way it's that is very clear. Just say discuss if you want to discuss something.
I like that. That's a great suggestion, Paul. Thank you. Okay, we're on page 20, healthcare. Bullet point 4 from Bridget, adding protect the right to access IVF treatment. Any discussion?
It's more complicated than that. I don't mind having this in here, but there's more complications than just that.
Okay. Anybody else want to discuss? Okay, Paul, when you say you're okay with it, do you want to add it to a discussion for down the line? Or are you okay with us going to a vote?
It's not just the right to access. The problem is that the very nature of IVF treatment involves having more embryos than you actually implant, and then what happens. So people will have access to it, but nobody will offer it precisely because nobody wants to be stuck with 20 more unimplanted embryos that if they threw them out in Alabama, they would have just killed somebody. So
let's circle back to that one then, just in case.
It's not really the right to IVF. It's the procedures of IVF that need protection.
Okay,
I've
got a last bullet point under that section. In addition from Lawrence, all doctors in the United States and medical treatment facilities must accept TRICARE medical insurance that military members and their families must have. Discussion.
Discuss.
Okay, thank you. Under Medicaid expansion and protection, the last bullet point, adding and the waiver that allows Texas to exclude many of the safety net providers most acceptable to provide high quality reproductive and contraceptive care to large numbers of Medicaid patients. Discussion.
Discussion and then use of the word waiver. I don't know if that's the appropriate language. I know what they're trying to say, but I don't know that that's it.
It's the federal waiver that allows Texas to do that.
Yeah, it's a term of art. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe add the word federal then.
No, it's the state that has the waiver. But yeah, so it's
the state is granted a waiver under a federal statute that permits states to request waivers.
And specifically, this is the 1115 waiver that the state has used to exclude several organizations that are affiliated with abortion providers as a way to say they shouldn't be eligible to provide for Medicaid reimbursements.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the concept. It just didn't read correctly to me, but that's okay. If it does to everybody else, I'm good.
Madam Chair?
Yes, sir.
I spoke to Larry earlier about his TRICARE piece. I think that the consideration between Medicare and TRICARE, they kind of overlap, because if we're mandating or asking for mandates in TRICARE or Medicare, I think we could do both to supplement Larry's concern that veterans with TRICARE are not being afforded the same rights of those that are accepted with Medicare. So
let's do address all of those things, but let's keep moving. So we're going to jump down to universal, affordable, quality healthcare. The bullet point beginning with prohibit. So we're adding rein in arbitrarily assessed facility fees. Discussion. All right. Is there any objection to this addition? All right, hearing none, that is added. Next, I've got a question from Tim. We'll come back to that. We have an additional plank. Require coverage for experimental and other treatments for all stages of Lyme disease. Discussion. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. We're jumping down to reproductive freedom and personal choices and abortion access. Second bullet point, adding protect doctors and hospitals from politically motivated attacks that hinder them from providing the best care possible, especially in emergency conditions. Discussion. All right, any objections to that plank? Hearing none, that one's added. That one's great. Thank you, Darcy. Okay. All right, we're on page 22. We have additional language added onto an existing plank. Remove the Texas requirement that minors of childbearing years receive parental consent before accessing contraception. That already existed. We're adding, including those eligible for Title X services. Discussion. Any objections to that addition? All right, hearing none, we're adding. Jumping down to more added language. Increase access to the accurate information about reproductive health, adoption, and related resources, as well as defund, in our new languages, anti-abortion centers, formerly known as crisis pregnancy centers or CPCs. That's the end of the new language. Any objections to that addition or any discussion? All right, any objections? Thank you. Somebody who works for an organization that gets confused as a CPC, right on. Adding safeguard patient privacy and prohibit medical providers from being forced to provide a patient's health records to law enforcement and other investigative authorities and discussion. Okay. Preventative healthcare, next section. Adding from Ash Hall, protect funding for HIV prevention. Discussion. Any objection?
A discussion.
Okay. All right, next section, page 23, under eliminating health disparities. Adding, in alignment with recommendations from the AMA, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Psychological Association, Endocrine Society, and the American, I think we're missing a word, of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, gender affirming healthcare should be guaranteed to all Texans who want it. I'm going to go ahead and just say discussion on that one. We're going to keep going. Let's see. All right, we're under energy and the environment on the subsection leading the global clean energy revolution, where that is page 24. First bullet point, we're adding the words job training. Any discussion? Give folks a second to read it. Any discussion? All right, any objection to the addition of the words job training? Great. Fourth bullet point, whole new bullet point. Support efforts from the Biden administration to consider the climate, environmental justice, and consumer cost impacts of the approval of new liquid natural gas terminals while ensuring that the global demand for energy can still be met. Discussion.
Discussion.
Okay. Last bullet point on page 24, support efforts to electrify and expand the availability of transit options like buses, light rail, and high-speed rail. Discussion. Any objections?
Public transit options?
So this is specifically transit, not exclusive of public, but not inclusive explicitly either. Happy to do discussion if you want to.
I'm fine.
All right, any objections? All right, that one is approved. All right.
You can skip that one, Hannah, because I think we dealt with it earlier.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to come back to your next one just because we don't have explicit language just yet. Same with all of those on that page, just so that if you have specific language you want to add into to adjust those, please feel free to do so, but otherwise we'll just cycle back to the comments. Okay, we are on page 26, second to last bullet point, increased monitoring of methane leaks in the oil field as well as along natural gas pipelines. Any discussion?
I guess discussion, because why would you not require increased monitoring?
Okay, and then Krista's got a comment too about changing the placement of that comment as well in the doc. All right. Okay, we have a new section suggested at the top of page 28, weather safety and response, with one of my favorite comments, which recognizes that the Texas Young Democrats do in fact have a weather caucus within TYD, because we got a whole bunch of weather nerds in our world. So let's go as a whole first. Is there discussion on the section as a whole? I'll give folks time to read. Paul?
I don't have a problem with anything that's in here. I'll have to think about it, but I think we should have some language in there that speaks to the weather safety and planning that the state takes into account, has to take into account the short-term and long-term impacts of climate change.
Okay, that's definitely something that we can add if you have specific language that you want to recommend. Marco?
I'll think about it. I may just try to do that when we're in permanent, but at any rate,
Excellent.
to address climate change.
Madam Chair, I don't have something specifically about this, but I just wanted to make a recommendation to members. I know that there's certain members that are on here. There's 50 plus people on this committee, and so really don't want to do the whole introductions thing, just because, just at the time that takes up. But I know that there's subject matter experts on here. So, if you're with Planned Parenthood, if you're with Equality Texas, if you're with AFL-CIO, I think we should, Paul, former legislator, and on all the things. If you could just announce that before, you're making a comment of some sort, because I know that's, some of us here might be lay folk and not be, in the policy work, and want to lean a little bit more towards those policy experts. That'd be helpful.
I think that's great context. Yeah, don't hesitate to lean into your credentials here, folks. We've got some really talented minds on here. Okay, I haven't heard any discussion on all of these, but I'm happy to break out individual ones. We can treat it kind of like a consent calendar. So is there any discussion on any of these weather safety and response planks? All right, are there any objections to the weather safety and response section? All right, Tim, I think you win a prize for having a whole section inserted without commentary. All right, page 29, second bullet point from the top from Bailey, adding prioritize expanding the state's transmission infrastructure to connect new generation to the grid. I think we might be missing a word between connect and new, but just like from a technicality standpoint.
I think that reads correctly.
No.
I have a
Oh, to new generation. I read in my mind, I read it as generation in terms of ages, not power generation thing. Poor context on my part.
Can Bailey define new generation?
Yeah, Bailey, would you mind?
Is new generation an adjective, like a precursor to something, a noun that's missing, or is that the proper noun? Is that the noun?
Yes, this would be like generation assets like wind and solar, but trying to not explicitly say wind and solar, because I think sometimes that throws some folks off. But it's largely wind and solar generation that we're trying to connect to the grid. We just don't have the the poles and wires basically to connect in a lot of places, particularly South Texas.
So we're missing a
Paul?
word. Okay.
Yeah, no, we're not missing a word. It's correct as it is. And I think she just said right there at the end, the thing I was going to say. We have a significant amount of generation capacity in South Texas that right now can't be delivered to the areas where it's needed. There's a bottleneck because there's not enough in the way of transmission lines. So we had, when we were having some of our shortfalls earlier this year, we had enough capacity of generation in the system, but we didn't have the ability to get that generation to where it was needed. So this is absolutely on point, and I don't think it needs a wording change.
No, that was my misreading, I think, was not reading energy generation. And that looking at it through that lens, that made more sense to me as well. So that clarification helped.
And if I have to identify myself, I'm a 50-year policy wonk. I've been doing this for a very long time.
That's a good way to sum it all up. All right. Any additional discussion on that? Any objection to the approval of that plank? All right.
Power generation.
So this one we need our language to be suggested indirectly, so we'll come back to that one. All right, reducing gun violence, top. Let's see. Stephen, I'm not understanding your comment here. Can you clarify?
Yes, ma'am. So, and this is something we've been a little confused down here. We had a resolution that we tried to submit. When I say we, Mr. Romo and our caucuses down here, a gun safety resolution that's included to the side. So instead of putting the full resolution in there, I'm trying to promote the verbiage that's over there on the side.
Oh, okay. I just saw the highlighting comments. I did not see the language farther down. That's okay. No, I hadn't scrolled down far enough. Marco.
Yeah, this was earlier, so.
So during our orientation, I explained how there's a little bit of a difference from the way the processes work from our county conventions. Everything's submitted in resolution form. I think we want to change that next year to make things a little bit clearer. But I think that gotten some good feedback. But right now the way it is that stuff was pre-submitted on a resolution form, and also if something was brought up to your county convention day of and passed, it was submitted in resolution form. That flows either to rules, platform, or resolutions. For rules and resolutions, if something's submitted, it has to meet a certain amount of county congressional districts, and that goes to temporary. It's 1 to 9, and that goes to temporary. If it's 10 or over, it goes to permanent. Platform is different. If you submit a resolution and it says this is intended for the platform committee, this committee is not obligated to take any of that wording that gets passed by any congressional district. However, all of that information of what was submitted, I think I've sent you an email with some links of that kind of language. So if there's any language that you like and anything that passed, you are free to insert it here as appropriate. So just wanted to explain the processes.
So as I understand it, if y'all can condense that document into a plank and just drop it in as a comment, I think it sounds like something that folks would be interested in discussing. But I am going to count it as something to discuss further forward, because it sounds like the text isn't quite ready to look at just yet.
I think personally it's okay because it's a very general statement, but okay, we can discuss it later.
So as what's in here currently, what's highlighted is in the platform and actually does not need to be approved. That's why I was confused about whether that was a new bullet point or not. So what you read here currently exists, and if we were to add anything else, we would need to make an adjustment and take it up for consideration, but we don't need to do this. But if you have additional language, Stephen or Lawrence, either of you that have worked on this that you want to add, then we can do that.
So, may I interject for just a point of clarity, ma'am?
Of course.
So, and I heard what Marco said too. Yes, this is a resolution that we've drafted coming out of Barrett County, but it encompasses almost, not all, but the essence of this plank in one resolution that says that we should, as a party, try to do better in that one first statement, advocate responsible actions to provide public safety. So it's proposing an actual day of suicide, not suicide, but gun safety and gun prevention in the state of Texas that would cover all those issues. So it's kind of a blanket resolution to cover all the below.
So if you'd like to do something that creates a day, if you'll just draft that bullet point language and then drop it in as a comment, we'll do that one for discussion, but otherwise we'll leave it right there. Like if you can do it in this, so for example, like the format that we did this last section where it shows up in that other text, because you'll notice that we're skipping over the ones that don't have that exact language already written into the document as a comment, just because otherwise I have to type it all out.
Right. So I think, and I'm not to belabor the issue, you guys, but I did insert the language in a note somewhere there. So let's move on, but it is there. I'll send it to you.
I see that you've got a hyperlink, and so maybe it's in there and it just needs to be put in as a comment. We might be like one step off. Awesome. Okay. Now that clarifies a lot. All right, we are down to page 32 under transforming policy, 5th bullet point, from Burke, and the practice of deploying SWAT teams to serve routine drug investigation warrants. And then the rest of the line continues. Discussion. All right, any objection? Hearing none, that is approved. All right. So we've got a suggested bullet point: eliminate the ability to use sexual orientation or gender identity as an excuse for violent action. Eliminate the gay/trans panic legal defense. So discussion. Okay, any objections? All right, hearing none, that one's added. Oh, shit. Pardon me. That's not the not the action I meant to take.
Pass.
Could have said so many worse things. Okay, we're gonna this is why to add clarification, that's why when y'all put them in as suggestions rather as just typing the language in the comment, it's really helpful because sometimes people do incredibly foolish things like that. Unfortunately, there's a recording, so what I'm going to do is end the gay/trans panic legal defense, which is the last clause in that. Because I don't remember the first section, but I'm going to highlight it and we'll go back and listen to the recording and figure out the part that I deleted and we'll add the whole thing in. So thank y'all for your patience with my technological ineptitude. Okay, scrolling down. More edits. Okay. On page 34, a new plank, adding the Texas legislature should appropriate the funding necessary to bring system-wide air conditioning to every public correctional facility in Texas, including facilities operated by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. Discussion.
I have a friendly thing I want to add to it.
Is it brief or is it just like a single phrasing thing?
It's really brief.
Okay, go for it.
Instead of just saying air conditioning, to bring all, I totally forgot, but basically saying that we bring everything up to code. So it's not just air conditioning, but all of it in one sentence.
Can I just go ahead and call for discussion?
I have discussion, yeah.
Yeah, let's do that then. Because I was gonna say, I'm not sure that code would require that. So let's definitely make space for an extended conversation. All right. Page 36, disability justice. So second bullet point, adding everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law and is therefore entitled to equal rights and treatment, and that no one should be denied these basic rights because of race, color, creed, class, national origin, sex, age, religion, ethnic identity, ethnicity, language, culture, sexual orientation, gender identity, economic status, or disability as defined by the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. Discussion.
Discussion.
Okay. I will circle back because this is a direct question to me from AJ that I thought I had already answered. I answered it in my mind. Let's see. Here we go. So we have a verbiage substitute. I'm just not seeing where the word expand is. Oh, here we
They
go.
don't quite line up.
Yeah.
Sorry, too far down. Okay, so fund provider training for all law enforcement, and then the paragraph continues. Discussion? I'll give folks a little bit to read the context of the paragraph. All right, any objections? Okay. All right. Okay. Adding under accountability, we're adding the phrase child sexual exploitation to this list of forms of violence. So establish regional response teams and task forces to assess community needs, build a coalition of agencies, prosecute perpetrators, and improve response for survivors of human trafficking, child sexual exploitation, interpersonal violence, and sexual assault. Any discussion? Any objection? All right, hearing none. Okay. I'm going to count that as a technical question.
I had a bullet addition in that section. I just wasn't certain where to add. So I guess that's discussion.
I'm not seeing it where
scroll down. You just went by it. It's at the bottom, I think.
Yeah, it's at the bottom of that section there.
Yeah, I just wasn't, there are people who have worked over the years on this section more than I have, and so I wasn't certain where to place that.
Okay. Can you describe your addition? I'm just not seeing it.
It was the more child exploitation. It's, if you scroll, I think it just ended up at the, there it is.
Here we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Increase funding for cyber monitoring and evidence gathering to deter, prevent, and prosecute child traffickers and sexual exploitation and solicitation. I think this is a reasonable place to potentially add it. Discussion.
Yeah, I just wasn't certain if it were under accountability or if we wanted it higher in the other subsection.
Thoughts from other folks? I'm going to copy it.
Accountability works for me.
Let's put it this way. Increasing funding would mean funding because we're not spending any money on it whatsoever, at least not as a state.
Correct.
Somewhat. The attorney general, the state attorney general has a task force, so they do get some funding, but it may or may not be specifically for cyber, for IT.
So I'm going to suggest that just here at the end of this section. All right, any discussion? All right, any objections? Great. Okay, no, thank you for that. Thank you for keeping me from skipping it. Okay, and I want to pause for a second. We are coming up on that 2-hour deadline, and it is 8:30, which was the previous advertised time for the end of this meeting.
Madam
So
Chair, I think we still have 15 more minutes because we didn't start live stream till about 15 minutes in. So I have a timer
Excellent.
that goes off at 8:45, and I'll let you know when we need to take the break.
perfect. Well, let's plan on that 8:45 break. So thanks for y'all for sticking with us thus far. Okay. So we are on page 40, religious freedom. And I'm going to make sure not to miss some of these colors are easier to read than others. Okay. Under religion should not be involved to supersede the rights of others. These rights include family planning services and access to abortion. Any discussion? Any objection? All right, hearing none. Thanks, Darcy and Paul, for that one. All right. Okay, now on to page 42, equality and social justice. So suggestion to delete the phrase, the same Texans that are often the targets of ignorance, and the remaining parts of that sentence. Is there any discussion? Is there any objection? All right, hearing none, it's deleted. Okay. I'm gonna revisit that sentence. Okay. Is there any objection to switching stand to unite to be more inclusive with our language? Right. Let's see. Is this, here we go. Yeah, add. So allow all people to live to their fullest potential. Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, that is approved. Thank you, AJ. All right. Adding, everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. This is, I believe, very similar to the one that I read earlier, and I'm gonna just save time by not reading it in its entirety from Imad. The right to recognition, regardless of any number of different identifying characteristics. Any discussion?
Yeah, just discussion on that one.
Okay. Alrighty, racial equity. So adding and then deleting some, we're gonna take that first as a whole, and then we'll break it down as needed. So the adjustment would read in final, treat Black, Indigenous, people of color, or BIPOC Texans who make up the majority of Texans as respected and welcomed as members of a diverse American family. Is there any discussion?
We decided to do away with citing specific numbers that were already out of date. And I actually had proposed to saying that make up 60% of Texans, but we decided even that might get to be out of date. So we just said that they're a majority.
Oh, that's good context. All right, any objections? All right, hearing none, we're gonna make that change. All right, third bullet point. Deleting call on law enforcement agencies to fully and vigorously enforce hate crime statutes. Discussion.
I was originally opposed to that, but the reason we struck it out is because there's a whole section on hate crimes below there, so it was sort of redundant of what we were otherwise saying in that section.
Oh, other good context. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Any objections?
I wrote the original hate crimes law, so I was sort of sensitive when I saw that bullet initially.
Oh, of course. No, that's a good chance to connect with other people on the logic. All right, any objections to this deletion? Hearing none, this is removed. Okay, adding on to an existing plank and the ability and right to celebrate their cultural holidays without penalty. Any discussion?
This is sort of an addition to laws we already have in the books that allow for celebration of religious holy days in a number of different contexts without penalty, particularly in schools, but actually also in court proceedings. And it was pointed out that that doesn't include, for example, Lunar New Year celebrations that are cultural and not religious. So that's why this was included.
Oh, thank you. Any objection to the approval of this addition? All right, hearing none, that is added. Okay, new plank, celebrate and honor individual heritage months in Texas. Any discussion? All right, any objection? Hearing none, that is added. We're gonna treat that as technical. Okay. Third bullet point from the top of page 43, adding recognize and celebrate AANHPI Heritage Month every year. Any discussion? Any objections? Great. And then I believe I want to make sure not to click this prematurely. So the next one would be stop legislative bills banning Chinese Americans from purchasing property and land in Texas. Any discussion? Any objections?
It'll be back next session, so we got to fight it again.
Agreed. All right,
Yeah.
hearing none, both of those are approved. Okay. This is slightly more than technical. So any discussion on changing Hispanic/Latinx to Hispanic/Latina/E/O Texans? I don't know if there's a more concise way to say that. I'd happily learn. Any discussion on that?
It was discussed at length in our work group. There is a lot of objection to Latinx within the Latin, whatever it is, community. And so people identify most frequently as either Latina, Latino, and or if they are not gender specific, the term being used now is Latin. So this was using the terms that are most often used was what was by the members of that community who were in the work group.
Excellent.
Latine.
No, thank you for that pronunciation clarification. All right. Any objections to that change?
What's going to be the change again?
So instead of reading Hispanic/Latinx, it'll read Hispanic/it's A/E/O for Latina, Latine, Latino.
What's an E? I've never heard of that before. Latini?
So
That doesn't
as
exist.
Paul just explained it, it's for those who aren't using a gender specific identity, like having to use the male or the female pronunciation, but I'll happily defer to somebody else. Darcy.
I belong to many Hispanic groups. I never heard of an E anywhere. Sorry. All right.
I can speak to that. So Latine is a similar to what Paul was saying about Latinx being a pronounceable word in English, but not necessarily in Spanish. Latine is actually what is used in other Latin American countries to refer to people who are non-binary or gender non-conforming, to make sure they are included in, what we consider Latino, Latina, Latine.
Okay, I learned something today. Thank you.
Thanks, Darcy. All right, hearing no objections, that is approved. All right, we have an addition. Make better health outcomes possible in Latina communities by effectively addressing the 5 social determinants of health, economic stability, education, social and community context, health and healthcare access, and the built environment in and around communities where they live, work, and play. Any discussion?
So, I'm sorry. So Latine with the E is all encompassing of Latina and Latino? Or is that
No,
only?
I would say it is, the understanding is that it is a separate form of it, right? So people who are identify as women can use Latina, people who identify as men can use Latino, and people who do not identify with either gender use Latina. So people who are Latina or Latino don't have to use Latina, but at least we have some sort of version of it for gender nonconforming folks.
So this bullet point is specifically for non-binary, for gender nonconforming.
No, so that would be to the
this one-
headline to be inclusive of all of those folks. Oh, I'm
And
sorry. I misspoke. Go ahead, Darcy.
So I use that, and later one I use Latino. So I understand that some folks are not as comfortable using that, and it's a way to blend both in, right? So Latino is technically for many understood to also be a non-gendered version of Latino, which that can be real, but also there are Latin people who identify with Latine that we would just want to be inclusive. So I am, and obviously I'm not the only person dictating this, but agnostic as to whether we use Latino or Latine in it, but as to a way to use and normalize both versions of it as being non-gendered. So it's not specific to the non-binary community. It is I would say Latina is more of a larger umbrella term that anyone who's Latina or Latino can identify with if they want to, but they don't have to. But it is at least inclusive of gender nonconforming people.
Any additional discussion? All right, any objection? Oh, go ahead.
The only thing I would ask us to think about, it's a point we discussed earlier in the work group that I was in, and that's that we have to consider who our audiences are for what we are writing here. And so the question is, what are the terms that are most meaningful for the people we are trying to reach? And are we only trying to reach the choir, or are we trying to reach a broader community than just the choir? And therefore, what terms should we be using that would reach the broadest audience we are trying to communicate with?
All right. Let's go with it as is, and if there are objections, we can revisit. So are there any objections to the approval of this plank? Okay, hearing none, that is approved.
Chair.
Stephen.
Yes, I've got to drop off. I apologize. We've got some weather issues here in McKinney and I've got to go. But if we have to have a vote, Marco is a member of the Veterans Caucus. He has my proxy if we have to vote on something.
All right, thank you so much. Be safe in the bad weather.
Thank you.
All right, page 44. We are. Oh, that's the top of the page we just did. My apologies. Okay, Indigenous Texans, adding the language that the Indigenous people of Texas have rights and deserve forms of reparations, and that tribal lands should be returned when at all possible. Discussion. Any objections to the addition? All right, hearing none, that is added.
Maybe that's something to.
Madam Chair, it's
Yes.
8:46. I recommend live stream / whatever break.
Time for a pause.
I'm gonna go ahead and pause the live stream.